Thank you very much. It is the 20th of August, 2025, and I'm Jess Wells. I'm the president of Music Arrangers Guild of Australia, and I'm really happy to be welcoming Roman Benedict, who is on our executive board, to give us a rundown on really good orchestral scores and parts formatting. Now, the reason I wanted to do this was a couple of reasons. One is that we've got our National Youth Arranging Competition, and people are going to be submitting things for orchestra. So we want to make sure that they've got that resource to be able to get their orchestral scores and parts looking nice for submission. Also, just recently, I've been assessing quite a few orchestral scores for various opportunities, ones with major orchestras. And I can tell you all now that when major orchestras are looking at scores, the first thing they notice is, does it look good? Does it look like a professionally prepared score? Does this composer know what they're doing? And you can pretty instantly tell if they don't. It can be, and it's a shame if it's a beautifully written piece of music, but you've got issues with the score and the parts. This will really help people, anyone who wants to be able to put their work in front of, even a community orchestra. I find sometimes when I'm composing for community orchestras, they're quite, easy to get up on your back about notation or whatever else it is, because they may not be professional level, but they're still very dedicated to everything they do. And they know orchestral music, and they want to be able to perform your music as best they can, and they'll nitpick you. They'll nitpick you even more sometimes. So this is an awesome opportunity to learn, and we'll put this resource up online for everyone. And I've asked Roman, and Roman, please tell us about your background and how come you're the expert at this.
Hello, I'm Roman Benedict. I'm joining you today from Gadigal country in Sydney. And just before we begin, I'll pay my respects to elders past and present, and acknowledge that this area of the world has been home to music making, although not necessarily typesetting, for thousands of years. I am a composer and an arranger, as are many members of this group, and also a copyist and typesetter. And as well as that, I produce and stage manage a lot of concerts. So every week I'm seeing scores, I'm handling music, I'm distributing stuff to players, as well as creating myself materials for everyone to use. I've worked largely in orchestral and classical performance worlds, but also in theatre, which is a very different way of working. But in a year, in one project, you can easily make 1,200 pages of PDF in a week. And that is more than any one person can easily handle without knowing what they're doing or knowing how to make the software do it for them. So I've put together some things to talk about. We'll talk about some various areas, and then maybe do some questions or some chat at the end. I'm hoping this will go for about, say, 45 minutes, and then we'll do some questions. So we'll rattle through stuff. I think the first thing to say is that for everything I talk about here, there will be an exception to it. For example, you talk about page turns. Oh, some people don't, the cues are half a page long. They've never had to turn a page while playing in their life. You talk about dynamics. Some genres it doesn't make sense for. So this is general guidance. But to begin, I thought I'd talk about a sort of a scenario that we're thinking of, which is you've got a lovely, perfect score. You've agonized over it for months. Every little dot is in the right place. You've really decided that, and it's a big orchestral work. You've worked out exactly where the accents go and all like that. And then you realize that in 3 days' time, the librarian wants the set of music for the whole orchestra. and you realize what you have is one document and what you need is 35 documents, and you've got about 3 days to make them all. Even worse, it may be part of a concert with 13 or 14 short works, like it's a set of songs, or you're doing a gala concert with excerpts, at which point you've got to have 35 files for each of those cues. At that point, you're easily over 1,000 pages of music with, let's say, 5 days, 1 day, however many, to get them done, and know that when they hit rehearsal, the musicians will sit down, play it, and no one will come up to you halfway through being like, there was a wrong note here, I couldn't read this bit, what the hell was going on? And even worse than someone coming up to you after a rehearsal is the rehearsal grinding to a halt and the conductor talking around and going, where's the copyist? Which is the nightmare of everyone. So I'm going to talk through some sort of approaches to how you might pull together that massive amount of work with the minimum amount of effort to get a really high quality result. Bearing in mind that in this scenario, what you're not doing is publishing the works for Baron Reiter or Henley Verlag, where their processes are completely different. They will agonize over every dot, every page. They will take the viola part away and give it to an editor who is a viola player. They will then take the cello part away and give it to an editor who is a cello player. They will have their house styles. They will have everything all set up, and then they'll publish it and everyone will go, oh, that's beautiful. What we're talking about here is you are the person creating the music and the person sending the music out, and you're working in bulk, because if you want to spend 1.5 years making this set of parts, your profit margin or your income for that year will be almost nothing. To start off with, I thought I'd talk about what is a part. It's a useful definition. We obviously have a score, and most people who write music will know what the score is, because it's the big thing that has, if it's not blurring me out, let's get my face there, that has all the instruments laid out. And when composers write, songwriters write, they will write the score that has everything in it. The part is what you give to the individual musicians in the orchestra, the individual musicians in the band, so that they can have just what they need to know, and they don't have what they don't need to know. Because if you're trying to play the piccolo as well as read a piece you've never seen before, you also don't need to know how to play the contrabassoon or the xylophone. So there's kind of 4 types of parts that you'll probably be creating for a work. There's the obvious one, which is single instruments, a piano, flute 2, any of those kind of things where it's one person who has their line of music. And I've got here from that score a work that I did. I'm going to turn off the blur because that is unhelpful at this point.
Thanks. Yeah, they're very blurry.
Too blurry. It's only
that's better. Yeah, that's great.
I don't want everyone seeing my moving boxes. But so this, I can't actually show you this because this is a trivia concert, and if I show you what's inside, you'll
ruin it.
Spoiled. But this was a project I did last year that was about 1,000 pages of score. And so this is what was given to the flute 1 part. It just has, this is what the flute 1 plays, and it lays out the stuff, and she doesn't need to know even what flute 2 plays. It would also, in that category, will be section instruments. So all the violins where they play the same line, they will have a violin part. Those are relatively straightforward to tackle. It's sort of, that's a basic part. Then you'll have doubling instruments. So where you have someone who plays flute and piccolo, or you might have someone particularly in musical theatre, you might have someone who plays flute, clarinet, oboe, bass, clarinet, and tenor saxophone, or some combination of those instruments, and you're creating a part for all of them.
Yeah, I've done a lot of musical theater, so, and I'm a woodwind player, so yeah. What you just described is exactly what I would have in my book.
Yeah, absolutely. And the process of creating that kind of reed part is different to creating a violin 1 part. Then in an even more complicated setting, you'll have a percussion part, which isn't so much as a part for one person with multiple instruments as a part for a section. And in older scores, it will be pre-designated that percussion 2 plays these things, percussion 1 plays these things. Mostly, if you're doing something that's never been played before and you're not a percussionist, you're making a percussion section part, and then the principal will go through and go, I play that, he plays that, she plays that, all kind of worked out. But what you have to create is a part that's impeccably clear, that has all of the percussion instruments in it. And as an important reminder, timpani is not a percussion instrument for the purposes of a percussion part. Timpani gets their own part, like a double bass, like a flute. Those ones can be really difficult, percussion parts, because there's not a tradition of it in the way that, you know, Mozart didn't write big percussion parts. You'd get a single line instrument with changes and stuff like that. And so depending on the piece you're doing, you'll probably have to come up with a new approach. It might need a percussion map. It might need an instrument list. It might just be done like a redoubling part where you have changes. You go to xylophone, then you play there, and then it's go to the bass drum, they play there. Or it might be, here are all the instruments all happening at one, you work out how you cover it, but you need to be clear about which of those it is. Then the final thing that would be counted as a part, particularly in musical theatre and opera world, would be a piano vocal or a short score or a reduction, where you're taking all of the vocal parts and maybe adding a piano reduction that isn't in the full score. But for this, we're not talking about arranging that, but assuming that it exists, creating that part that looks nice and that the singers can follow to, even though the orchestra isn't written down, they can still know where they are in the musical or in the opera. So those are kind of 4 types of parts. There's probably hundreds more that have happened over the years. Sometimes you'll have weird experimental things as well, and often with smaller chamber works, musicians, particularly now they're on iPads, like to just use the score, and you'll spend hours laboring over a set of parts and then notice that they're all just using the score so that they can see what the other people are doing. But particularly for big orchestral works or long concerts, that's just impractical.
Yeah.
Also, this top bit, I thought it's worth talking about templates and house styles and setting up your documents. If you're running a shop, an arranging house, you've got your own templates. I'm sure Jessica has her own templates and her own house styles and has all of the programs set up exactly the way that she wants them, with the key commands in the right place and the margins perfect and everything's to take out all of this work. For this, I'm going to assume we don't have that because it's more fun. Often if you're doing different types of projects, you may not use templates in that way, because what you want for a musical theatre project isn't what you want for a Schoenberg's symphonic work project. The musicians will look at you weirdly if the things are not there. But it is really important to look at how those things work in the program. So in Sibelius, it's house styles, and also having a physical document that, like a file that you open as your starting point when you're preparing stuff. In Dorico, it's in a slightly different system called master pages, and the endless menus that Dorico has for tweaking everything that you want. And they now have a system to import a batch of settings from something else to apply them. The general guideline that I've read is anything that you'd need to do more than once or twice, you set up an automation or a setting or a template for. If you're going to have to open every part and move a dynamic 2 clicks to the left, maybe change your setting for how dynamics are placed. But you talk to copyists, particularly who've been running copy houses or who have been doing the business for a long time, and they will have their template and they will hate any update to Sibelius because it will break their template in some way.
Yes.
Sometimes you find someone running a copy house and they're still using a 2006 version of Finale because that's the one that works in, and they can just put the music in and the parts all come out beautifully. Wow. I'm always like updating my software because it gives you new toys to play with, and so my templates are always broken, and so I always like to build things from scratch when I can because it's more fun. I'm now going to show you, just so that everyone, I say everyone, but there'll be more people in the future. Everyone who knows what we're talking about. I'm now going to share my screen because I want to show a comparison of two parts. So just checking you can see my screen.
Yep.
Great. So first of all, I will open, this is a cello part from Mozart Symphony number 40, which is from the Neue Mozart Ausgabe, typeset by Bärenreiter. It looks lovely. It is I won't say the ideal, because classical music typesetting has some quirks that aren't great, but it is professionally done and beautiful. If you compare it to this, which I downloaded from MuseScore online, and aside from the fact that they've misspelled Wolfgang, but just looking at how the music works, it just looks ugly. And at first glance, you don't know why it looks ugly, because to an extent, it's got a lot of the same features of that part. So if I just put them side by side, it's got, it's got roughly the same amount of bars per line. It's got bar numbers in the same place. It's got the same notes. It's got the dynamics, but something about it doesn't look great. It's got some weirdly crushed up bits. Whereas this one, there's a lot of stuff there that just makes it feel more reassuring. And we'll go into why that is. Also, just for a fun show and tell, this was a present for me a couple of years ago, which is
cool.
a Henley Verlag copying plate, because they've gone digital and so are selling off all of their engraving plates.
That is awesome.
This was for a Chopin Polonaise Fantasy, Opus 61. And this is how it was done before the computers. Good luck to anyone who wants to do that, because that would have been hand engraved with some little chisels.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I know.
It's a sheet of metal. It's a sheet of metal.
It's a sheet of metal that's been hand engraved. I'm going to stop share to make it larger. But the amazing thing with this is they do it and then they proofread it, and then they probably melt down the plate and do it again, or bring out the soldering iron and fill in the little mistake and re-engrave that section. And if you look at other parts from that time, you can see all of these little splotches, or there's certain editions that are just known to be full of wrong notes, have different things. There's certain editions where you can tell that one copyist did the string parts and a different copyist did the wind, brass and percussion parts, because they've used different words, they've put different spellings of the same notes, they've done all sorts of things. So while this is like the lovely ideal, no one works like this now particularly, and you don't need to, because the computer does a lot of that for you.
Thank goodness.
But it's beautiful. So now it's in a frame and hangs on my wall. And we will look at various reasons why the free download from MuseScore doesn't look like the free download from IMSLP. There's a few resources that I think are worth everyone knowing about. The first and most important one is the MOLA, which is used to be the Major Orchestra Librarians Association, and they're still called MOLA, but that now stands for the Performance Librarians Association, which is an acronym that doesn't work. But they have produced these guidelines, which I will pop into the chat just for anyone who wants them, which will tell you everything you need to know about a part in terms of page size, page weight, font size, all sorts of things, bar number placement. And it isn't necessarily correct, but it is a house style that librarians are used to seeing. I would say it has a lot of opinions as a document, and some of them I would disagree with. However, it's super useful if you're in a hurry going, oh wait, what size paper should I put this on? It tells you the difference between B4 size and A4 size and 11:9 and all of these weird American sizes. It's super useful. A book that is great that I'd get out for you, but it's somewhere in a big box, is Behind Bars by Elaine Gould. It's a sort of industry standard book that most libraries will have now as well, where you can go and if you want to know if dynamics go above or below the stave, or any weird notational quirk, where the slurs meet the note head at the tail or the note head, any of those things, she will have an answer for you and will often tell you why.
Would you type that into the chat?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Actually, your first one didn't work.
Okay, I've got it as a file as well, so I'll share it.
Yeah.
Share it later.
I'll put Behind Bars in.
Yeah.
Ta-da.
But that applies as much to scores as it does to parts. So you will have probably already thought about a lot of those things for your scores, but it also applies to parts. And then finally, as a resource, the Dorico help pages and forum, the Sibelius forum, Reddit and YouTube are great for any working out, oh, how do I get this, tuplet to cross a bar or whatever those things are. Again, they apply as much to scores as they do to parts, but particularly for parts, those will be really useful for this bit of music isn't showing up in the part. Why isn't it there? How do I make the template different for a percussion part to the other ones? All of that stuff. So I thought there's kind of two areas that I think are worth looking at. First is things in your score that you could do so that the program makes it easy to make the parts. What you want to avoid is manually creating all of the parts for your music because you don't have time for that. But there are a lot of things that you can do and I'll mainly be talking about Sibelius and Dorico because those are the ones I know. I would talk about Finale, but it's less relevant. And MuseScore, I don't know well enough for part creation, but a lot of the things will have comparable things there. But in your score, so before you've even created a part, these are some things that are really useful to know. First thing, make sure the piece is finished. It doesn't make sense to start preparing the parts until you've got to the last bar, because so many of the things you're doing rely on the software knowing how long the piece is, what the shape of it, where the markers are, all of this stuff. And if you create a cello part for a symphony when you've only done half of the first movement and then you go and you finish it, you'll open that part again and it will be mangled because it's tried to add in everything else you've done after that into that. 10 years ago, this was an even more firm rule because we had to export all of the parts into their own files. And so you take your score, you spit out all of the files and they wouldn't be linked. So if you change something in the score because a conductor said, oh, that should be a B flat, it wouldn't reflect itself in the part. And so you'd have to do everything twice. Now the things talk to each other, but it still makes sense to finish the piece before you start making the parts.
Yeah.
That is partly because one of the golden rules for making a part is making sure the parts match the score, making sure that the notes are right. Now the software will do that for you. It's very difficult to have a part that doesn't match the score. It's also very difficult to have wrong notes in a part that aren't in the score. That can sometimes actually be worse in rehearsal because the trumpets will say, oh, I've got a D flat there. And the conductor will look at the score and go, yeah, I've got a D flat there as well. We're both wrong and we don't know what it should be. Whereas in the olden days, the trumpets would go, I've got a B flat there. And the conductor would look at the score and go, oh, mine says a B natural and let's move on. However, for almost everything else, the fact that they're linked together is really, really good. And not breaking that is an important thing when you're trying to make your parts. The best thing and the most important thing when you're building all of your score is that things are, for want of a better word, semantically correct. so that a dynamic is put in as a dynamic, a tempo mark is put in as a tempo mark. You're not putting dynamics in as technique text, for example, in Sibelius. You're not putting tempo changes in dynamic text. All of these things, you haven't taken a trumpet part and gone, oh, actually this would be better on trombone, and just changed the clef and changed the name of that instrument to trombone, because then what won't work is the transposing function. It won't work with the ranges. All sorts of things will break because the system still thinks that that is a trombone, the system still thinks it's a trumpet, whereas you think it's a trombone, and you can't work out why your entire part is upper tone when it's put in front of a trombone player. So really being careful to use the right type of object. It's easier in a way in Dorico because they make it much harder to put the wrong type of object in. Ornaments and techniques in Dorico don't just accept any old text. So if you wrote a tempo in a technique text in Dorico, it would just remove it, whereas Sibelius will take any text in any box. And then the other thing is making sure that the dynamics and any system objects are attached to the right staff, so that a dynamic is, because you can drag them really far away, you might have dragged it to the next staff down, but it still thinks it's attached there, or you might have dragged it just a little bit far down. This is a particular problem in Sibelius. You drag a dynamic down because it's clashing with the note, and it would suddenly attach itself to the staff below. You don't notice in the score, but as soon as you open the staff below, you can't work out why there's a stray dynamic that's just attached itself to that thing. So being really clear about every object is attached to the right instrument, and then all system text is actually system text and not just regular text at the top of the score, because that will only appear in the flute part or whatever's at the top of your genre of music. And then you will attach it, and you can't work out why none of the tempo indications are there. So really just knowing how the program works, being really familiar with the different types of objects, trills as opposed to ornaments, as opposed to dynamics, as opposed to custom text types and custom system texts and rehearsal numbers and all of that kind of stuff. If it's all in there as it's supposed to be, it will all just flow into the parts without you having to think about it. If you're doing a weird avant-garde experimental work and you need to do something weird involving rehearsal numbers that are kind of offset and all of that, that's when you start doing things manually, because it's not designed to work that way. And then the other thing that's really important to get clear in a score is the scaffolding of a piece, so that the page numbers, the bar numbers, page numbers are less relevant in the score because they don't come through, but bar numbers, making sure that there's no secret, like hidden bar resets. So you discover that you're missing a bar, making sure that your time signatures and key signatures are all put in the way that the program expects. Rehearsal marks are there, tempos are there. You have as much extra information as you can so that you can follow the part without any cues. Then at that point, you can put some cues in for the areas where players might get lost. But in an ideal world, you put enough furniture in your work that you can look at a score and hear what's going on and go, oh, it just changed to 3/4, we must be there. Or, oh, we just went up a tone, we must be there. And then after 64 bars of that, you might go, okay, we'll have a little cue just so you know where you're coming in. But maybe in that big stretch of 64 bars, you've got a rehearsal mark every time the melody comes in or something like that. And then all of that will pass through into the parts and the players can just read it and know where they are. So if I just share this part again, you'll see one of the really big differences between these two is that the one on the right, just assuming you can see it, has no furniture. So if we look at this score on the left, first of all, it's got the name of the composer, it's got the name of the piece. They both have that. Then it's got the fact that there's a first movement. We know we're in the first movement. This one, it just starts. Here, it has a tempo indication. This one doesn't. And here on the top left, it says what instrument this part is for. This one doesn't. Those are all really useful things that before you've even played a note of music, you know, when the conductor says, okay, first movement of the Mozart, you can open that thing and know that you're there. So all of that stuff is really helpful. And then when it comes to other furniture, you see in bar 43 here, it says in the Baronreiter, it says general pause. In the bad one, and to be fair, I did export this in a way that made it particularly bad, but so I'm not blaming whoever did this, because whoever did this was slightly me. But it doesn't say general pause there. There's no way of knowing that there's going to be a little gap in the music at bar 43, but it's there. Similarly, later on, there's these bar rests. There's a repeat at the end of the page, which the repeat isn't there at all in the other one. Don't know why it's not there. And then if we look at here on bar 130 something, it's divided into these minims that are crosshatched, which is clearer for repeated notes. It's easier to count as opposed to here on the right. And then it says you've got 5 bars rest, and then the violins do this with a little cue. So whereas here it's just got 5 bars rest, and then you come in, no idea of the context, no idea of the furniture. So adding all of that stuff into your score then feeds through. So we've made it 150 bars into this piece before you get a single cue. I mean, it's partly because cellos are playing a lot and they don't need to count as much. But if you have all of that furniture in, and because of the era of this, it doesn't really have rehearsal marks. It doesn't have a lot of tempo changes or time changes, but all of that stuff just means that a musician can follow along without getting lost. And then cues help a little bit more. A fellow member of the board sent through some important points, and one of them was about these tempo markings in this furniture stuff, which is if you're changing the tempo, i.e. with a ritardando, accelerando, anything like that, you need an arrival tempo at the end. You need to say, here's where the tempo changes starts, here's where you're at, and this is the world you're in now, because then you have more furniture and you know, oh, there's a rit here, oh, and it lands at this speed in this place and not just carries on forever, especially if you use the formatting for written accelerando, which doesn't have a line, it's just the word. You want to put in, if you start an idea, you finish an idea, so that it feels balanced on the page. It's always nice to have a bit more information, but also you can tell in there, oh, we're halfway through the writ, oh, we're at the end of the writ, okay, this is the new tempo. And when they land on the new idea, when you're listening along, your eye just goes straight to allegro and you go, great, we're there. I thought I'd open a file in a software, if I can. We'll see if this works with the screen share. This is some folk songs for orchestra. So this is a full orchestral set that's done in Dorico. The other example I'll share later will be in Sibelius for people in different systems. So full score, here we go. So this is how the full score looks on something like this. And you can see there's a lot of furniture in this. This is a more modern arrangement. It's quite silly, so that there's a lot of changes. But straight away, you've got the name of the piece, you've got the name of the composer, you've got a speed, you've got a time signature and a key signature. And then at letter A here, you've got a letter A, you've got a key signature change, you've got a double bar line. So you probably don't need any cue marks for this, because you've had 13 bars rest, and then you hear, oh, the key's changed, and you're in. And then there's a time signature change and all of that. And in a score, that's all what it is. But if I open a bassoon part, and you'll have to excuse all the little system flags that are in there. Is this large enough for people to see?
Yeah, that's quite good.
Great. So this doesn't have any cues in it. I think I couldn't be bothered, or I didn't feel they were necessary. But if you're looking at this first bit, you've got, it's 13 bars of 6/8, then there's a key change, then there's a 9/8 bar, a 6/8 bar, and then you hit letter B where, assumingly, something will change. And then you've got 8 bars, and then you come in on a key change. So all of that is almost enough to not have any cues. However, for some instruments, for some music, cues are really important. But all of that framework in there just makes the music, you can tell by looking at it where you are, what it looks like, what type of piece it is, what it's going to play, where the difficult bits are, because of the denseness of the music, how far it's laid out, all the balance of it. And there is no hard and fast rules for those. You want to look at the page and go, oh, that doesn't feel very balanced, I'm going to spread that out, or that's all spread out, all of that. A really good thing to do that I would recommend to everyone is when you're working on a project, do one part and then print out that part. Because on the page size that you're planning on printing on, because Dorico and Sibelius, they're slightly different systems, but they both go, here's the numbering system that we use for staff size. Let's say in Sibelius, it's 6.8, 7 millimeters is the standard staff size, as is Dorico. That means nothing to me. I've been looking at it on a computer screen for however many weeks I have. I can make it bigger just by zooming in. But you print a part, you open it up, and you look at that, and you go, actually, that feels a bit big. Or, oh, I can't read that, it's come out tiny. And then you look at that. It will also tell you about margin sizes. You go, oh, there's loads of white space around the edge of the page, or, oh, it feels really full. And you don't need to print every single part and then go, oh, they're all a bit small. You print one page, you go, okay, this is what this project needs to look like. It needs to have, and if you're working in a pop idiom, you might have a bigger staff size because you want to have 4 bars on a line, which is the very traditional way of doing copying, where every line has 4 bars, doesn't matter the key signature, the time signature, how many notes there are in those bars. And then you can't do that at tiny sizes because those bars are kind of all stretched out and weird, or if it's too big, that won't work. But it's the best thing to do is print off one page, print off one part, same with the score, print off the first couple of pages of the score and go, that doesn't look right. And even better, get another part of something that you like, or that's something that looks nice to you, and compare them and go, oh, right, that just is a bit bigger, that's a bit smaller, the margins are different, the fonts are different, whatever. You can recreate something from Universal Edition by doing that. You can just decide what you hate and do other things. It's a really useful thing to do once at the beginning of a project, find all your settings and then deliver, and you know what it will look like when it's printed and put in front of a musician. Can talk about page sizes for parts. In America, they have very particular sizes about pages. In a lot of stuff, they use B sizes, which is very difficult for people to print in Australia, unless you have access to specialty paper and specialty printers, or you are friends with the librarian at the Sydney Symphony Orchestra who has a big old stack of that stuff. So a lot of stuff that I do, particularly if it's self-print for ensembles, is an A4 part and a A3 score. That isn't great. A4 is a bit small for a lot of music. It ends up feeling a bit cramped on the page and all of that. However, it's the easiest to print. So you balance all of those things up by printing it yourself and going, oh, okay, I know what I'm looking at. So at that point, you've got your score document looking great. You've got all the music in there. The work is done. You've got some cues in there. Every item. So just to show what I mean about attached things in the right styles. Here is a dynamic. You can see that there's a little red line saying that it's attached to violin 1. What it is possible to do is drag that up there, and then you'd think, oh, that dynamic is on the snare drum. However, the software still thinks it's on the violin part, and when you create the violin part, it's going to have a stray dynamic in there. In terms of system text, that's a rehearsal mark. You can see where it's attached to, but it will appear in every part. And this is done as system text. So it will appear in every part, but I can equally, if I create just some regular text here, this is just standard text that I've made bold. And that looks exactly like a tempo indication. However, if I go to a part, it's not there.
Yeah.
And someone is going to be confused about in that rehearsal. If I go to the flute one part, it's there twice. So that's when I talk about having your score correct. That's what I mean. Also, there are things like at least some point in the process, transpose your score. By that, I mean, sorry, I've got to remember where it is. Concert. So concert pitch puts everything in the pitch that it sounds in, and it's going to take a while to think about this. So everyone is here in A major. However, if you look at a horn part particularly, which is always the giveaway for me, these look okay. Yeah, they're okay in this, but if you go into transpose pitch, you'll see that's actually quite high. So even just for ranges, it's really useful. Yeah, it's up. It's a fifth higher. Your spelling in the clarinet parts, all of that, transpose it at least once, and then you won't be caught out when it appears in a score with weird double sharps, double flats, turns up with a key in 7 sharps, all of that stuff. Yeah. So now we'll talk about the parts. Again, when it comes to just laying out a part, and I'll open a flute part. So you want to think about appropriate margins for the part. And so if I bring over the layout settings in Dorico, and Sibelius is very similar for this, you say, okay, here's the page size. Here is the size of the music. And I've picked a slightly smaller size than the standard for this. The sort of defaults. The defaults are fine, but they tend to be quite big. Yeah. And then you pick some margins. These, I think, were the default margins for this piece. But you might say, I want to get it all on one page and it's just not quite fitting. Let's make the margins bigger. Or you might be thinking about particular dimensions because it will be appearing on an iPad. Any of those things, that's where you make those changes. You also, here in Dorico, you make a whole bunch of settings about titles and flows and stuff, but really the basic stuff of page size, space size, and page margins will radically change what your score looks like for just a few tweaks. And it's worth playing around with that before you do too much more, because once you've started casting off, you'll run into problems if you then change the margin size, because everything will break. Once you've done that, you then, in the old days, it was called part extraction, but now it's all linked parts together. But the basic idea is there's one instrument per part. What you'd never create unless you're working in a very specific genre or very specific ensemble is multiple instruments in one part, other than percussion. But i.e. you wouldn't have flute 1 and 2 on the same part, particularly not flute 1 and 2 on the same staff in the way that they appear in the score. So if I show you the score here, and we go along to here, flute 1 and 2, this is what their staff looks like. It's in double stops. It's easy for the conductor to read. You can analyze what's going on. And then here it's got rests underneath. So you could, in theory, give this to the flute players and they could read it. However, it is much, I say better, it's industry standard that they get their own part. And now Dorico is built that way. So what you originally do when you write it is you create a flute 1 part and a flute 2 part, and then in the score, it combines them into one. Sibelius works the other way, where in the score, you create both parts and it splits them into 2 different parts. I haven't really used that feature much for that kind of thing because I have largely worked in Dorico since that condensing feature was introduced a couple of years ago, but you want 1 person per part so that they know exactly what they're supposed to play and not being distracted by what the other person's supposed to play. This music is relatively easy to follow. If you're doing the Firebird or something where you've got these big runs and swoops of stuff and you've got both people on the 1 part, it will be a nightmare. So really avoid that. And so you've got your part. And now the thing that I want to talk about, you've exported it into 1 flute part and it's exactly what's needed. You've checked all the notes. There's no weird transposition things. Great. Then you're looking at casting off, which is a process, an old typesetting process, but it's how much is on each line. So if you imagine the music as 1 kilometer long staff, you have to cut it up into chunks and place it on a page so that you can read down the page. And so the process of this is usually done through line breaks, but there's a whole bunch of things. The easiest way is to click a bar line, create a system break. And then what I've done is I've reduced the amount of material on that page and I've increased on that staff and I've increased the amount here. And then, so I might say, oh, the thing is, I really want this it should be a new line musically. It feels a bit weird. I put a system break in there and it will redraw everything else. And it spaced it out a bit more. So in that instance, this looks a bit weird, this line, because it's so spaced out. However, in other instances, particularly in Sibelius, we'll go for a very tight note spacing by default. And you just tend to go through and just add extra line breaks to spread it out and give it a bit more room to breathe on the page.
Yeah, but it also tends to then push it so that there's like, extra lines over on a page, and like formatting in Sibelius can be an absolute nightmare. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. I would say that it's a thing that we often worry about, but I think mostly no musician has ever been annoyed that they have an extra page. They have been annoyed if they've turned a page and there's been 4 bars of music on the next page, because that's a lot of thought and unknown. But if printing and paper is much cheaper than it was 150 years ago.
Yeah.
If you look at these old parts from Bärenreiter and Ricordi and stuff, they are jamming so much music onto the 1 page because it was really expensive to print. Now we can give it space to breathe. And as long as what you don't end up with is something like this, actually, no, that's fine. Hang on, let me do it like this. That is the most annoying thing in the world, because the musician doesn't know what happens at the end of this page.
Yeah.
They've turned the page and gone, oh, there's 1 note.
Yeah.
And they've taken their hand off the instrument to do that, and they've probably missed the last note of the piece.
Yeah.
So at this point, you'd probably be trying to get that note. And sometimes it'll be there by default, and then you're trying to squeeze it just onto the page before. Dorico has these really useful things called move to previous system, move to next system, that it stole from Finale. But they're super useful for being like, for example, this pause here, I might really want to be the end of a bar. I move it to the previous system, but now this system is really crushed.
Yeah.
And so then you might say, okay, now this is where I want my system break to be. Okay, I look at that and go, letter G, that is a phrase. It starts there and then it ends here. And then that's a new idea. Yeah. And then here there's a crush, which is where the gentle waltz, which is 7 bars long, but in this person's not playing, so it appears as 1 bar. So I'll put a little line break there. And now this line makes sense. Yeah. It's a tempo rubato, and then it goes into 3/4, accelerates into a waltz, and then we're in an andante. And you can just see all that furniture in a kind of way that makes sense on the page.
Speaking of that, is Dorico better at placing the furniture, as you put it, in the same location on every part? Because Sibelius, I find I spend a lot of time, moving things around so that they're legible and so on and so on.
It's not that much better. It has a weird quirk where it tends to stack things up and up and up. If stuff is too close together. So often the way I do it with Dorico is, if you want to stop things being in weird places, is spread the music out further, and all its algorithms kick in when there's space for it to go. It's not very good when everything's cramped. Like, you can do it much better by eye when everything is cramped, but if there's space, it's quite good. Sibelius handles stuff a bit differently. It will kind of bump stuff together and move it out the way in a slightly weird way.
Oh yeah.
Another thing to think about is number of staves on a page. I find Sibelius and Dorico a bit full. They tend to put 11 or 12 staves on a page, on an A4 page, and that can often feel like there's just a bit too much stuff between. I'm going to see if I can force it to do this without mucking around in the settings, but it would mean that you end up with lines where this is kind of there and that there. And the easiest way to resolve that is chuck some extra line breaks in, spread it onto a third page.
Okay.
You can also go into the settings and say, I want 10 staves per maximum 10 staves per page. I think in Dorico they call it density, and you can see it's got all of these little. This page is 85% full. This page is 71% full. Which is useful for spotting stuff, but in Sibelius you can do it by eye. You don't need a number that says it's 85% full. You just look at a page and go, that's too full. And so it's all there. So it's worth thinking about, for the genre of music you're doing, how dense the music should be.
So you're using rehearsal letters or lettering, but I was sort of under the impression, for example, concert band music would prefer either numbers, bar numbers versus letters. Is there sort of a convention for that?
I would say, Jessica may be able to weigh in. This has both bar numbers and rehearsal letters. In orchestral stuff, it tends to be that you would have letters for big numbers and bar numbers for every bar, because otherwise you're saying, okay, we'll go from figure 4, and there's some confusion about whether that's bar 4. I think in film, the convention is that you would have a rehearsal mark actually just be the bar number, but in big font in a box. So it's always bar 27, whether it's big or small. It has varied over the years, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, and a lot of the Hollywood stuff that I deal with in library, they don't use any rehearsal numbers or letters, and they just put double bar lines everywhere. They then literally have to go, we're going from bar 73 or something. But then what I do is, when I do the film score prep, I put them in A, B, C, D. Because film score cues are short. You don't get long stuff. So A, B, C, D is great. And I put them at sections and edit points. And you end up, conductors who are coming from England or whatever, they don't do it. They start using them. They start using the rehearsal letters because they're so handy, right? And I think they're fantastic. They're so handy for knowing where you are. And I just did a ballet, and I instead, because it was so big, I had to use rehearsal numbers that don't relate to the bar number. Figure 4, figure 5, and I got to figure 78. It was.
At which point you'd be at figure BBB.
You can't do that system, which just doesn't. Yeah. So if it's really huge, you can't. Yeah.
Musical and theatre and pop would also use. Musical theatre tends to use letters because it's useful, but they do sometimes also use the word verse 1, verse 2, chorus. They use structural stuff like that. So it really depends on the genre, but there's no. But
for my big band, I use letters, but for concert band, I use numbers.
And those are the conventions there. And talking of the film cues and stuff, I was going to touch on page turns, which are super important in parts, but are weirdly not very important in film stuff, theatre stuff, because it's actually quite rare that you get to a second page. Strings, Yeah.
because there's a
And then if it's recording, you then stop, and then you all turn the page, and then you do the next one, rather than in a concert trying to turn the page. And
Yeah.
there's some weird things with parts, like not having everyone's page turn on the same bar. Often the system will go, that's a good point for a page turn. And then you watch a concert and 104 people have turned the page at the same time, and it's louder than the music that was before it. And most of the time, look at page turns. So strings are more forgiving than woodwind because they have a desk. So one person can turn the page while the other person plays. That's less than ideal, but it's okay. Woodwind, if there's a page turn in there that they are playing through, they either can't play it or they can't turn the page, and so they'll get the librarian to make a little insert. There'll be extra admin, all sorts of stuff. Just so that I'm showing you what I mean, this one is a thing I did a while ago. It's actually not very well page turned. There's very few spaces in this. It's the Romanian Folk Dances by Bartok. There are very few places you can get a page turn in this piece. And so you see in this violin part at the bottom of this page, which is the right hand page, it is this page of it. There is no place for a page turn before going into the second movement. Bottom of this page, which technically doesn't need a page turn, I've got a lovely page turn.
Right.
And then here you've got another page turn there. So you're looking for the gaps. I always like to put the rests, and it's general convention to put the rests before the page turn, because then they can turn the page and keep counting. If you put the rests after the page turn, they don't know they're there until they've turned the page. And again, you've just ruined their afternoon because they got stressed over something they didn't need to. Sometimes you can't avoid a bad page turn, at which point you essentially apologize to the musician by putting a little note that they need to turn the page hurriedly, or you reformat the page. I mean, possibly in this one, this page turn is quite useful here. A more natural thing to do for the layout of this music would be to put the page break there. That makes a lot more sense musically. Look, it's movement 4, then you turn the page, it's movement 5. But because it's a tacker, I've got the first 4 bars of movement 5 on the bottom of that page, so that they can turn the page and get into the movement while the music keeps on going. So you make choices about page turns that are not necessarily reflecting the musicality of the music, because it makes it easier. With iPads, it's in some ways less relevant because you can have a foot pedal, so you don't need to stop playing. But actually it's more relevant because what iPads don't have are 2 pages next to each other. They have 1 page. And so now when I'm doing scores, I try and make every page have a good page turn, because you don't know which is the good page and which is the bad page. So I'll be there, just if you have the option, trying to get extra page turns on every page, just in case someone's on an iPad, all of that. It's also worth talking later about iPads in terms of margin size and page size and staff size. But the only way, again, rather than printing it out, put it on an iPad, look at it and go, oh, that's really big. Because or more common on an iPad, it's really small, and so you just pick a bigger page size and it will replace.
For me, that's the score. Like if I've produced a score, I have to be careful about what it looks like on the iPad, because I use an iPad for
And Sibelius had an old thing that they've kind of made less of a thing, but if you added a new instrument, it would say, oh, there's a lot of music on this page, can I decrease the staff size? And you go, yes. And then you reach the end of the project and everything was the tiniest stuff you'd ever seen, and you wouldn't notice because you'd zoomed in every time. Whereas what you actually want to do was make the page bigger, or tell it to suck it up and make it work. So page turns are very important for score prep. You do the best you can. It will never be perfect, because sometimes you're doing something like Flight of the Bumblebee or Bolero, where they just, like Bolero, the snare drum part doesn't have a good page turn in it. They have to lay out every page across the score because they don't even have 1 beat to turn the page. It's fine, it's the same thing 58 times they can manage, but it's, that kind of thing is just, you do the best you can. Also, when we're talking about casting off, you're also looking at clefs and key signatures. So making sure that in the part, the clef is right. Some instruments like a different key signature in their part than would be in the score. So sometimes, I don't know concert band stuff very well, but tubas, euphoniums, stuff like that will often be in treble part in their part, but a bass clef in the score,
Yes.
or the other way around. Certainly in orchestral stuff, often you'll have horns in bass clef in a score, but not in the part, because horn players may not be very comfortable reading bass clef, but conductors aren't very comfortable at reading hundreds of ledger lines that are sitting over the trumpet part because they're so far below the stave. Similarly, and all of the, when you're choosing your instrument in Sibelius, it gives you the option of how you want these things to go. So like tenor saxophone, baritone saxophone as an example, often you'll have in a score, it will be in bass clef.
Yes.
But the player doesn't like playing in bass clef.
Nope. So you choose the bass clef with transposition and treble.
Yeah. And so you set that up in the program when it doesn't need to be when you're writing it. You can set up a new instrument, copy all the material into it and get rid of the old one. And then you know that the transpositions will work the way you are. But really with that stuff, be very careful because the clefs are important. The other important thing is transpositions, checking that your horn in F is the right horn in F, checking that your things are in the right octave. Classic ones for that are double bass and glockenspiel. Double bass transposes, well, sounds an octave lower than written. But it is not really a transposing part. So when you transpose your score, nothing should change. But sometimes in a part, something can go wrong and it will transpose the double bass up the octave because it sounds an octave lower than written. Similarly with glockenspiel, it sounds 2 octaves higher than written from memory. And again, you just don't want those things transposing away. So really checking all of that. And then the other thing that is a nightmare when a part preparation is enharmonic equivalent keys. If you've I was trying to think of the right example of this, but if you're writing a piece in B major and then you've got a trumpet part and a clarinet part, they're suddenly playing in C sharp major, it might make more sense for them to play in D flat major. Which is a fiddly thing to do. Actually doesn't happen that much in part preparation now because you try and avoid those kind of clefs keys when you can, or you might say, actually, we'll do this on a clarinet in A, rather than just because then it will solve that problem by making it the thing in D major, which is a lovely key. And so really, I mean, say for people entering the competition, you really don't want to see a transposed wind part in 7 sharps unless there is no way around it. Or if I were to open that version of the folk songs that I did, the trumpet and clarinet part have 32 bars in 7 sharps. It doesn't matter. They're all rests. So we don't care. But just thinking about that for all of those things and your double sharps in transposition, this is why I say open have the horn transposed. This is not the horn, have the score transposed. However, if you're not in the classical concert world, you should write on your score whether it is transposed or not. It's the assumption in the classical orchestral world that it is a transposed score. It is incredibly difficult, particularly with works like Schoenberg. He did a lot of his scores in C and at sounding pitch. So the double bass part is unreadable. The piccolo part is unreadable. All of this stuff is all over the place. And he also doesn't say it's a part in C at sounding pitch and there are no key signatures because it's open atonal music. But then parts come in from the place and they are all done properly. That kind of stuff was a 3-month nightmare for me last year. Just trying to tackle some Schoenberg scores. But really just looking at those keys and times and all of that stuff. A couple of other part specific things and then we'll move on. I realize I've gone on much longer than planned. Instrument changes, relevant for woodwind players in an orchestra, very relevant in musical theatre, relevant percussion, all over the place. looking at how to handle instrument changes does vary by genre. Sometimes you will, I mean, the standard way is you have one line that is the player's line, and then you'll, in Sibelius, put an instrument change in where the instrument changes along that staff. In Dorico, you actually put multiple instruments into the player in the setup, but then it renders it as when they finish the last note of whatever, you know, flute part they were playing. Let's just see if this is opening. It will say to piccolo, and then it will carry on writing, and then it will say piccolo, and the music will start. And that's the kind of standard way of doing it. You want to look at, sometimes if you're going between transposing instruments, checking those transpositions that they are in the right place. Sometimes going into a B flat clarinet, if you've been previously on an E flat clarinet, and then there's, you know, there's 64 bars rest, but there's some really weird key signatures in there that would make much more sense to stay in the E flat clarinet there, just so it looks right on the page, and then the B flat starts. It makes no difference to what the player does, because they still put down the instrument and pick up the instrument.
Yeah.
But looking at all of that is, you know, you want it to be really clear at any point what the person is playing, particularly if they have multiple instruments there. You need to know, they need to know which one they're playing. I think that the software rarely does is say what instrument they're playing at the first time they play. Particularly in Sibelius, it's very bad at that. And so often manually I'll add, in this case, piccolo, because you get the part, it says it's flute 2 and piccolo, and then there'll just be a stream of notes.
Yeah.
What are those first ones on? It says piccolo here, great, they're on the piccolo, and then at figure A, they put the piccolo down, get the flute, flute's out.
Yeah.
And they're off and away. There are other ways of doing this, and in Dorico they are done as instrument chain, that it's done as a setting. Let me just, if I turn off that, it will show you the other way. That, so for some instruments it would make sense to have it like this, but what it doesn't have is any labels. So then you need to turn on your staff labels, so that the player, now it wouldn't make sense for a flute 2 and a piccolo, but for someone who's playing piano and celeste, maybe this would make sense. Or if someone is on a really weird doubling, like a non-standard doubling, or there's some really fast changes between them back and forward, which, like, so percussion, you'd probably present like this, rather than as necessarily instrument changes depending on the part, because otherwise you just end up with a staff, especially if Dorico's generated it, that just says to drum, to bass drum, to cymbal, to that, and back and over, and that's unreadable. But you have it here and you go, oh, it's that over there. So you just look at those in terms of how it works. But this is the other way that you might present an instrument doubling in certain genres of music. Not so much in this kind of orchestral stuff, but I've definitely seen it in theatre a lot, where someone is playing guitar and keyboard. It doesn't make sense to pick up one and the other, they're different staff types. So look at similar scores for that genre and just see how they're handled, and then make sure that at any one point the player can look at bar 79 and go, that is on the flute, or that is on the piccolo. They're not sitting there being like, oh, I don't know what instrument that is, because that doesn't help. Similarly with divises, which are kind of like instrument doublings, in that, but the opposite, in that a section will split in half. Have I got any nifty divises in here? No. But be really clear, and the software isn't very good at, particularly Sibelius isn't great at divisi splits and staff changes, where you go, okay, I'm putting this on 2 separate staves, or a divisi at the beginning, say divisi, say gli altri if it's a solo, and then really, and then crucially at the end, close them again. If it's not really clear where the divisi finishes, it will fall apart. And then the other stuff that you might want to think about in a part is extra staves. So in some concertos, you might put the soloist line in the parts so that they can follow the solo, particularly if it's a contemporary music kind of part where sort of following the furniture doesn't really make sense. You might put the there's a violin concerto that I've seen that did this, where the parts all have the violin part in it because that's what everyone's following, and you know when the cadenza is finishing because you can read it.
Yeah.
Particularly in opera, particularly in Baroque opera, the parts for the continuo parts will all have the vocal lines in there so that they can take their cues. A lot of it's collo voce, all of that. The way you would do that in this software, and just I'm only doing this in Dorico because that's the one I've got open at the moment. But let's say I've got this violin part here, and I say, it would be really useful if for the whole thing they could see the flute one part. And all I've done is added it to the thing. And what I might do is change the size of it. You can make it a smaller staff, so it's clear that it's a cue staff, all of that.
Yeah.
And it's all there. That's genre specific. And then similar to that, percussion parts, which I've already touched on, there is no right way to do a percussion part. There are lots of good ways to do a percussion part. There's lots of bad ways. It really depends on the genre. It depends on how busy the percussion writing is. If they're not doing anything, if it's like Bruckner 7, where they sit there for an hour and 10 minutes and then go 2 crashes of a cymbal and then clock off for the night, you don't need to really overthink, do I do it as instrument changes? Do I do it as a short score? What you're really worrying about is the structure of the piece and the cueing so that they hit that exactly. But that's not about the percussion part. That's just about all the other stuff. So timpani is not percussion. They have their own part. Apart from that, I tend to put everything from a percussion section into the one part. The principals are really good at dividing it up. And if something doesn't make sense, they will usually contact you and say, hey, this really doesn't work with this runaround. Could it be changed? Could it be put into the other part? Or more likely, they'll go to the orchestra manager and say, we need a 4th percussionist, because that's how they tend to work. And that person will sit and do that one bit of music that you didn't quite fit into the 4 lines. But that's the way I've tended to do them. I'm sure Jessica's got a different way of doing percussion parts.
No, we always provide a percussion score. I call it a percussion score. And we label it at the top left percussion score, and it has everything in it. But often I can't do page turns if it's nuts. So it's a reference.
Yeah.
So if they have it as reference and know what's going on, they can instantly see what's going on. And then we do the individual parts and mallets. Even if it's like, if we do a percussion score for the people playing bass drum and triangle and bits and bobs and snare drum and that, and we could do like 3 of them together, that could be good. And then anyone with mallets on their own. They don't want to see everything else. If they're just playing marimba the whole time, they just want to see the marimba part. So you just give them that. So sometimes you give them score, percussion 1, 2, 3, marimba, whatever they need, but depends on what the music's doing.
And a really useful thing to have on that part is that it's a percussion score, and then somewhere a list of the percussion, because
we list everything under the title on the left. So we'll say tam tam timpani, but not timpani, tam tam bass drum, whatever it is for each one. So, and if it's percussion 1 part, it's only tam tam. Whatever. We list it on the top left so they can instantly go, that's the only instrument I need for that particular piece. So really helpful.
I will say, if you're doing that, either do it or don't. Percussionists have been burnt by reading the list at the top of the page and going, this is my instrument list, and then getting to page 9 and suddenly there's a vibroslap. And they go, we didn't know there was a vibroslap. And that's fine. I once worked on an opera where they made it 2 hours into rehearsal, and then the conductor turned around and goes, where's the wooden flute? And no one knew there was a wooden flute in the part, and the orchestra manager had to start calling around. So you can either have the list there and make it sure it's got everything in it, or don't have a list at all, and then the person will read through and go through it. But don't do half a list. It will cause more problems than Yeah.
That's real. I have caught out once or twice that I just did a ballet, right? It was nuts. It was huge doing all the parts. And I caught out one percussion part where they'd forgotten to change the list. So thank goodness I caught it. But I was checking that list against my spreadsheet, which is good because in my spreadsheet, I get each scene and I put what instruments are in that scene. And that's so I can work out a basic plan for the percussionists
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
most of the time percussion one's got the vibraphone or whatever it is, and then I'll plan that. So you kind of have a good setup between them. They often have to run around sharing things, which is fine. But if you mostly give percussion one
Yeah.
one thing and that, and the bass drum goes to the bottom player, whatever it is, that you work it out so that they have generally they're at a station.
Yeah.
That really, really helps them.
Absolutely. I think I've done a few projects recently where it's been I know it's been two percussionists, and because it's been like a gala or a bunch of snippets, we can't work out who's going to play what. And
It's
on
all
the
over the
day,
shop.
they're being like, "Should you do that? I'll do that one, and then you do that one." So just a percussion score is enough.
Yeah.
For a big work, particularly where the composer is writing it.
Mhm.
You're thinking about the percussion when you're writing the work.
You try to.
You try to, and so you're working out how that all plots through, and there at that point individual parts are useful, but they might want then in that part piano cues, they might want other stuff if they're interaction. So percussion is a whole seminar, and it should be run by a percussionist, not by me.
Yeah, that would be a good idea. One day we should do that for sure.
Absolutely. I think that's nearly.
I have to sort of go at this point.
Sure.
but
Absolutely.
I just have a couple of questions.
Go
Go
for
for
it.
it.
Yeah. So it seems to me from what you've shown me that you've moved from Sibelius to Dorico. So can I get your sort of impressions about the two different programs? Because I've been on Sibelius for well over 20 years.
Oh yeah, I mean, I've used Sibelius for 20 years. I've used Dorico since they made it. I still work in both.
Yeah.
I tend to use Sibelius when I'm working with other people because it plays, people know how to use it. It plays nicely. It's a very established platform. I tend to write in Dorico because it suits how my brain writes music. That's essentially it. I think Dorico has some very interesting development behind it that is pushing it into new areas for score prep. But
like what?
The way that it handles everything is a variable. So everything is a menu, and you can say every note has a different size. You can do all of this stuff. The way they've got engines about chord symbols and a whole they're just building features in that way that they've got a different approach that is a bit more is going in interesting places. But in terms of creating nice scores and nice parts, both of them do it really well.
Yeah.
It's about what suits the way that you write, what suits your genre of music. Dorico, the real struggle that people have with it is it's got a very strong idea of how you create music, and it wants you to do things in a certain order, but then it is incredibly powerful when you put those in. So you can't do an instrument change in the way that you do in Sibelius. However, you can say that this person is holding 3 different instruments, but you can't. So you kind of everything's done in a different place.
Okay.
Whereas Sibelius, everything is done on the page. Whereas Dorico, the page is sort of secondary until quite a bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a battle to learn the new things, and I'm learning Dorico too, but I also have 2 people in my team who are much better and have gotten much better at it than me. So I can ask questions and go, how do I do this? And they'll quickly tell me. The good thing about Dorico is if you do want to learn it, is there are a ton of videos that are really helpful to help you get through it. But if you are going to try, then you have to print out the sort of shortcuts and put it next to you because you won't remember. It'll be totally different to Sibelius, and you're like, ugh.
Yeah.
But eventually you get there. But
or the new really useful shortcut J, which is the jump bar, and then you just type whatever you want into that.
Yeah, that's super handy. Yeah.
I realize we're going to finish up in 5 minutes, and there's a couple of other things I wanted to touch on. But they're kind of quick general notes. So just thinking about the house styles of whatever genre of music you are, just familiarize yourself with those and know this is what this looks like. This, 4 bars to think this is what rests look like in pop music versus rests look like in classical music. Particularly multi-bar rests have different kind of ways of looking, and you want it to look right. And then the other thing with furniture is title, composer, instrument name, and key, cue number, copyright, percussion instrumentation. You want all of those somewhere on the front page. And then on every page after that, you want a header that has at least the title and the instrument number. I used to work in a library, and every now and again, you'd open a filing cabinet and find a piece of music that just said cello on it.
Yeah.
And you didn't know what project it was, what cue it was. This was in a theatre. And so whenever I can, I tell people, say project, title, instrument, page number. And then you can, if you find a piece of music on the floor, you can reunite it with the rest of the set. Super important. It's also in this stuff that you can elevate the look of your score. You can go wild on fonts on the title and the composer and even the name of the instrument. It's really not recommended to go wild on fonts on tempo indications and dynamics because they don't look right. Every now and again you get a score where publishers try to use a sans serif font for tempos, and it just makes you cry a little because it just looks weird. But to make your music look like your music, these areas are the places you can play with. You can use absolutely batshit fonts in the title if that's what your kind of musical brand is and how that works, or you can really use like elegant, lovely sans serif things. This is a fairly boring sans serif kind of thing, but it makes it just different from the default form. I think people who see a lot of scores can just tell by looking at it when it's a Sibelius default file or a Dorico default file, because you just recognize the font choice and the way that it lays out music, and you go, oh, that's a Sibelius one. It's not necessarily bad, but the place to make your part is at the top of the page. At the bottom of the page, there's a copyright notice here. In this one, on the top of the page, it's got the logo of the project, it's got the cue number, it's got the title, it's got a subtitle, all of that kind of stuff. And then the music itself is basically default fonts and default formatting, but it makes it feel like I put some effort in. And the crucial thing is that's all done in the template, not in the individual files. So in Dorico, in engrave mode, it's down here, and I'm not going to go fully into page templates because they have really good tutorials about this. And it's also, again, it's a 3-hour thing by itself, but you open here, the first page, you make the changes to the template, you close it, and then it will appear in every part. So if I open a clarinet 2 part, it now says hi. And that's the way you handle it there. Every project I do, at some point, I'll make the edits in the part itself and then realize that I should have made it in the template. And then you go back. Sibelius has a similar mechanism for apply to all parts. That is, again, there's really good tutorials about that, but don't do anything in the part itself. Do it to the template for the part, and then you can do it 35 times. And then my final general note is file naming and file management for when you are creating 35 parts. Libraries love them to be numbered, where when I do it, I do 0, 0 is the score, and then 0, 1 is flute 1, 0, 2 is flute 2, and you work your way down. If it's a really big orchestra, you might get up to 45. Chamber orchestra, you might get up to 8. Whatever it is. You don't need it. You don't necessarily need your double bass to always be part 30. It could be part 8, but if you're doing multiple cues in one project, like this quiz concert that I did, the double bass was always part 23. And even if there was no tuba, there was a gap there, because then the librarian could look at it and go, great, I've got all of the part 4s that the file naming has the name of the project, the name of the title, the cue number for this, because cue numbers are relevant, and then the instrument name. Actually, it starts with the instrument name. just so that it's sorts properly in a folder of documents. And then they can grab all of the flute parts quite easily and compile them into one PDF and send that off, or you can do that yourself. I also, for some projects, will start to put the date, and both programs have a wildcard where it will put today's date in when you print it. It's very useful for version control. Version controls, it's a whole separate discussion topic, but again, the two ways of doing it are when you print, you set it up so that in the file name options, you say, this is what I want my file name to look like. So you see this one has the date in it. But if I reset to default, this is the standard one. This is part 6, clarinet, and the numbering is done in the setup. This is where you set how the numbers go. Sibelius, it's a much more manual process for numbering, but it all works. And then often I'll go into the files and just clean them up in terms of taking out weird things and renumbering things if they've come out weird. Then you end up with a folder full of 35 impeccable files. You've looked at each page for probably less than 2 minutes, because that's as much time as you've got per page if you're doing 1,000 pages. You look at the page, you move some things around, you make it all look right, you move on to the next one, and then you export everything, and you've got files that tell you exactly what they are. And then the librarian will come back and say, hey, this double bass part says the word flute at the top of it. It seems to be named wrong. And you hopefully catch all of those things. But this kind of stuff will set it up well. And I think that brings me to the end of this long monologue about parts. Was there anything, Jess, you wanted to throw in there?
I think just some general points for people who are sort of starting out, because some people might be doing their first set of orchestral parts. Just think about, just read the part along with your own eyes as if you were playing it, because most people who are writing an orchestral piece are playing an instrument of their own. And think about what you've seen, you know, in front of you as a player, and read it through yourself. And that can catch a lot of problems just by spending the time. I like to look at the PDF. So if you get you're in your software, you're doing your parts, make the PDFs, go and open the PDFs, and it looks different, you know, and look at it, look at the page turns, look at the PDF in the 2-page spread. So you see where the page turns are, and just give yourself a good proofread of that. You will catch things out that you can't see that well in the software. It's interesting because our eyes, our brain just kind of look at it as if it's a printed page. And like you said, print one out and have a look. And just
you can also turn off the flags in a so in the program you can set it so that all of the stuff that isn't on the page will disappear temporarily, and that's super useful.
It looks like a PDF. It looks like a printed page.
And like I've just opened this part in a PDF, and this slur here is wrong because that should be sitting over the notes. I don't know why it's done that. It's you know, and that's when you catch this kind of stuff.
Very important.
It won't slow down the rehearsal, but it's there.
That's right. And I think I like to think about the tempo of the music when you're thinking of the spread. So something that's at crotchet equals 180 is going to be tighter. You're going to fit more along because your eyes are going faster. So you want to see more on the stave. But if your crotchet equals 40, and I've caught out many copyists not thinking about crotchet equals 40, think about how actually slow that is going, and your eyes are traveling across slowly. You don't want to cram that music up too much along the line. You've got to stretch it out, and then you might do only 4 bars per system, you know, instead of 8. So tempo for me is also important for thinking about how that music is read. So those are the main things about parts for me, apart from being very neat and tidy and line things up with something. Christopher Gordon will always say, if something lines up with something else, it'll look neat.
Yes, there's a real common problem in both softwares where, like here, you've got 2 tempo indications. They don't quite line up. And you've got a real classic one is accelerando, ... And then somewhere above it is the new tempo because they're not jointed.
They're not horizontal.
And lining those up makes it clearer to follow through because you can see the progression of ideas, and also just makes it look neater.
And it looks neater. Yeah. So those
Yeah.
little things are actually worth the effort to go through and tweak.
And the other thing I was taught was that it should sound as dense as it is. So when you have lots of little black notes like this, you expect it to sound dense and have lots of stuff going on. If it looks dense on the page and it sounds really slow, like if you've in a crotchet equals 40 and it's really dense and it's all of that, then it's not looking how it sounds, and that will slow you down in working it out. And similarly, if you've got a really dense bit of writing but you stretch it out over lines, it doesn't look dense, and so the player won't go, oh, that's a fast bit. When I did some musical theatre work, there was a group of arrangers who did them, and the rule was if you accidentally made a line where it was 1 bar to a staff, you had to buy everyone else a drink, because the software would love to just like put 1 bar on a staff, and actually then it's too stretched out. You know, with if these bars here, they're kind of, you could accidentally have 2 bars on a line, and that's not going to tell you what that music's like, because it's rolling by, it's fast, it's dense. So it should look as dense as it sounds was a really helpful thing. That's
a great, that's a great way of thinking about it. Yeah, for sure. Has to make a musical flow.
Yeah.
On the page, that's what you're aiming for. And it really helps the players, especially if they have to sight read or don't have much rehearsal time, which is often the case these days.
And if there's one held dense bar and they've ended up having to fluff it and move on, having it contained in 1 bar, they can really get back in. Whereas if it's stretched out over a line and a half,
it's very hard for them.
They're still 4 bars behind. Yeah.
Excellent.
And
Thank
then
you
just being
so much.
Really clear on the layout, the part naming, all of that stuff, so that you can open a part and know exactly what to expect, and you look at the page and go, oh, I know what that piece is. It saves so much time.
These are really just absolutely perfect points to be pointing out, that it doesn't really matter what music it is. It doesn't matter if it's an orchestra piece on a concert stage. It doesn't matter if it's in a recording studio or a pit. It doesn't really matter what it is. It just needs to be clear, readable, legible, understandable. Everybody know what they're doing, and there's no wasting time in queries and things. So yeah, I think copyists are often that last port of call before it gets printed. So if you find a mistake and you're working for a composer, you should point it out to them and point out the mistake. You know, you might find these things. That's your job as well, to fine tune. If you're doing your own piece, it gives you an opportunity to find little mistakes, correct them as you go. So,
and then after it's been played, if you're lucky, you get a big box full of scores back, and it's your job to go through them and make sure that all the things that the players have done to fix the mistakes you made, because there will always be some, incorporate them back into the files so that they're there for the next time.
Yep, that's right. Big job. Thank you so much, Roman, and thanks, David, for attending. And we hope you got a lot out of this. And we will put this video up on YouTube to watch again in case there's any points that you missed and want to look back. Yeah, we look forward to getting, you know, everyone's parts and scores looking nice for every entry that there are. The thing I put in my Facebook post about this was like, you do not want to be put on the no pile when you're being assessed for some opportunity that you've worked so hard to write beautiful music for, and you want it to get played, workshopped, whatever it is, and they go, this doesn't look like someone that knows what they're doing, and just throw it on the no pile. And that will happen if your scores look yuck or if your parts look terrible. So yeah, that's why everyone should strive to make it good, because then you go up the chain, not down.
And especially as the point at which they're being looked at, not listened to. So you want to make them nice to look at and clear to look at, not great to listen to.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And we'll see you at the next one.
See you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Roman.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.